quieting down so quickly. You're almost as good as my student. I'm Randy Phillip, and I would like to welcome you to our distinguished lectureship here at San Diego State for 2019. We're just really, really happy that you're here. It's a Saturday morning. It's a gorgeous day, and we're here to do some really interesting work and thinking related to teaching and learning of mathematics. So this is our leadership team at CRMSE, and we have to thank all of these people for the work that they've done to make this possible. Shout out to Matt. You want to raise your hand? He's a graduate from Deb and Candy, I don't think are in the room because they're Candy's here. And I would like to now introduce the CRMSE Associate Director and a wonderful colleague, Bill Simon.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you to Randy also for getting us all organized, and I think we deserve a round of applause for that. So as the Associate Director, one of my jobs is to organize the different talks that we do at CRMSE, the Center for Research in Math and Science Education. So if you have not joined one of our talks, I want to say welcome, and we are excited to have you here. And if you have joined and come to some of our talks, I want to say that's great, and keep coming back. To let you know about what we do, we have every year the Distinguished Lecturer, which is a once-a-year event where we bring a nationally recognized scholar in math and science education. We have CRMSE Colloquia, which happen 2 to 3 times per semester. The speakers can be invited by CRMSE members. If there's a speaker that you want someone to come, then you should let us know, and we can put the invitation out. And I want to make sure you know that our next speaker is Catherine Ye from Chapman University. This will be on Friday, May 10th, down at the Center for Research in Math and Science Education. And the last thing, has an endorsement. And the very last is that we have CRMSE brown bag presentations, which are held as often as needed, and it's an opportunity for folks who are researchers or trying out a new idea to share that and get constructive feedback. So if you would like to be added to our email list, you can email crimsey@sdsu.edu, and you will get our emails and notifications. Next, we have some wonderful dignitaries from SDSU who have chosen to join us. Joe Johnson, who is the provost of SDSU, who Randy is going to stand in for in a moment. Jeffrey Roberts, the Dean of the College of Sciences, and Karen Myers-Bowman, the Associate Dean of the College of Education. So I'd like to give them all a moment to welcome you here to the distinguished lecturer.
So Joe Johnson is the provost, which is the chief academic officer at San Diego State University. Wonderful guy. And he's fine, but I got an email last night that due to a family health emergency, he would not be able to join us this morning. If Joe were here, he would start with a lovely story, because that's how Joe operates. And he would, I think, leave us with this sense of tremendous appreciation for the work that the people in this room do and the recognition of how important it is for our society. And he would shout out to Megan, thank you for being here and for all you're going to do to promote some really, really important ideas. So I'll say that on behalf of Joe, not as eloquently, but there it is. I also want to acknowledge our deans and thank them for coming after their welcomes. These people have really crazy schedules, and so it's likely that they won't be able to stay with us this morning, but I just want you to know how much we appreciate that.
Thank you, Randy. Joe is a hard act to follow. You know, many big channel it's true. I am so pleased to be here this morning. For most of you haven't met me, I've been at San Diego State just for 2 months or so. And what most of you probably don't know actually is that Randy played a role in convincing me to come here. He was on the Dean Search Committee, and he had the task of driving me back to the hotel at the conclusion of my interview. It's over. And we had a really great conversation. It was a really meaningful conversation for me. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was CRMSE and its important work. So, you know, as a dean, one of the things that I'm always looking for are intersections. Places where the interests of two parties cross in important ways. And when you go into the intersections, often that's where the magic happens. And for me, CRMSE is smack dab in the middle of two wonderful intersections, meaningful intersections. It's a place where scholars, doing what scholars do, creating new knowledge, where they work to better understand the world around us. In this case, how human minds engage with and learn the mathematical sciences. And through that work, we learn how to support student learning. So what an intersection, research and student success. I get excited about that. CRMSE is also a truly interdisciplinary home, an intersection, if you like, for faculty and students who work in the College of Sciences, my college, and the College of Education. Collaboration is a tremendously important value for me, and CRMSE is an example of a cross-college collaboration, the likes of which we have very few at SDSU, and in my opinion, we need more. So for me, CRMSE is really an indispensable part of this great university. I so appreciate the opportunity to say a few words this morning. Thank you, Professor Frank, for traveling to San Diego to present a lecture this morning. And thanks to all of you for working so hard to help our kids better learn mathematics. What a calling. Enjoy the morning, and I will turn it over to my colleague in education. Thank you.
Good morning. What a lovely, crisp morning we have today. I like those. I'm Karen Myers-Bowman, and I'm the Senior Associate Dean of the college, and I've been there since January, so we're both rather new in our roles. My training is in child development and family studies, so I'm very interested in how children learn, and I have a couple of those myself who are no longer children, and my first grandbaby's coming soon, so that's who I'm looking forward to learning next. But I'm very, very honored to be here this morning to welcome you from the College of Education. Education and the training we give to teachers here at SDSU is strong, and we are well represented across the state and across the country. One of the reasons for that is because of the strong leadership. Joe Johnson was the dean and was such a strong leader for the College of Education and has now served in his year as interim provost and has brought those skills to the entire university. Dr. Barry Chung, who is on vacation right now, is continuing that really strong leadership. And many of you knew Nadine Bazook, who I have taken this position as she retired. And she especially was such a strong leader in math education across the state and nationally. So when you look at that leadership, you understand why the College of Education keeps climbing in its rankings. Leadership is an important part of that. But another really, really important part of that is what you all are doing and what the faculty are doing. And I think CRMSE is a really great example of why we keep climbing in the rankings. I'm going to echo what Dean said about how it's because of the intersection, and I would call it a bridge. So CRMSE really provides that bridge between research and practice. They're both so strong and they're equally valued in a way that creates a partnership so that educators can get trained here and go out and make that difference in kids' lives. I have two sons, and they're both math thinkers. They just think math. And they're also both musicians, and that's what they would have said in high school. I'm a musician. But who were their favorite teachers? Their math teachers. And they were the ones they would say made a huge difference in their lives. The choir director too, but the math teachers. And why was that? It was because they understood my kids and they met their needs in a way that as gifted kids, they went the extra mile with them. They met them where they were and they went the extra mile. And I've seen that over and over again with math and science teachers. And so I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to do the work you do as researchers, as teachers, as educators. And thank you, Megan Franke, for being here to really make that bridge and build it strong. So have a great day. Thanks. And enjoy.
Thank you again, Deans. We greatly appreciate that. Before I introduce Megan, I would like to make another sort of recognition. One of our really important mentors in our field, both to Megan, to me, and to other people, many other people, is Tom Carpenter. Tom Carpenter began his career as a school teacher before coming to SDSU, where he earned his master's degree. So he was a student here. And then he went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he earned his doctorate. He had a brief stint at Boston University. He came back here as a faculty member in the math department as a mathematics educator before he went back to the University of Wisconsin for a long and distinguished career. And we're acknowledging, remembering Tom because he passed away last year. And part of the choice of topic and selection of speaker today was a way to recognize Tom Carpenter. So just a few of the many things that he's done. He was the editor of the premier journal in our field. He served for about a decade on the National Assessment of Educational Progress Development Team for items. He also was on a task force that helped analyze the results of those items. He directed a diversity in mathematics education center that was involved with several universities around the country and from which many math educators emerged. His list of graduate students and publications is long. He was awarded the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics Lifetime Achievement Award. Many of you know or have heard about cognitively guided instruction, hereafter referred to as CGI. That will be in the background throughout the day. Tom Carpenter and Elizabeth Fenema get the credit for beginning that. And if there's a third person associated with that, the next one I would associate with is Megan Franke, who we have today. There's lots of other names that have been associated with it, but I think that they really serve as the foundation. I think Tom really believed that mathematics was a basic human right. And he worked really, really closely with teachers. In fact, I still remember he was one of the first researchers who would take teachers to the American Educational Research Association, which is very researchy, and have those teachers present with him, so that he didn't just talk about what the teachers were thinking, he let the teachers talk about what they were thinking. It was really cool. I stole this slide from Megan, Vicki Jacobs, and Susan Emson. I'm told that Vicki was the first person responsible for this, so I'm going to give her the credit. This is a slide that trying to capture the inspired work that has grown out of the foundation of cognitively guided instruction. And at the base of this are quite a few studies leading, even before 1989. This work started with a study of children's mathematical thinking. How do children solve problems? And then using that, it led to a study where they shared that knowledge with teachers to see how that would play out. However, one of the strengths of CGI is that it's constantly evolving, and lots of other topics have now been studied from this sort of paradigm of starting with children's informal mathematical reasoning. And similarly, the early research started with primary grades, and that too has evolved into other grade levels. And you'll hear a little bit about some of that today. And then finally, throughout the years, the research has focused on teaching and learning, but then those ideas have evolved into a variety of different areas, such as teacher noticing, teacher knowledge, teacher's beliefs, etc. So you're looking at sort of a tree of work that has had a deep and profound influence on many, many people in our field, and I think on literally millions of children around the world who have experienced the results of this through the teachers that then have taught them. So thanks, Tom. So the plan for this morning, just so you kind of have a sense, is that Megan will start presenting soon. We will be together with Megan till 10. That includes time for question and discussions. Then we'll take a little break. There will still be the food left outside. Did I get that right? I think so. You can grab something. And then we have 3 choices for breakout sessions. And roughly they were designed, in this room will be a continuation of Megan talking to people from a little bit more theoretical research perspective. It's more of a question-answer discussion. In 102, which is across the way, there'll be a focus more for school teachers, for people who are thinking about working directly with children. And that'll be Melissa Soto and Rachel Madison. And in 104, it's going to be a focus a little bit more on professional development. And I thought maybe I would let each group take a minute just to say what you think is going to happen in that room, so that the people in this room can make a decision. Megan, something you want to say?
So I think that the idea behind the follow-up session after my talk is to dig into some of the details that I don't get to talk about today that have to do with the underlying theories and studies that led to the kinds of things I'm going to talk about today.
Melissa or Rachel? Why don't you stand up just so people can see who you are?
I'm Rachel. I'm Melissa, and so what our session is going to focus on is we're going to be examining student work samples and really trying to focus in on what are the students understanding, what are they thinking about, and we're going to then analyze a questioning framework. So really thinking about what types of questions should we as teachers be asking of our students to try to help assess their understanding and really to push their thinking forward. And then we're going to spend some time doing a poster and a gallery walk where we're going to then go back to those student work samples and really think about what questions might we ask to address those students' mathematical thinking.
And Dinah and Kristen?
We are very excited because we're unveiling this year the SDSU CGI Professional Development Collaborative, and Kristen and I are the co-directors of that. And actually, all of our presenters are sitting right here, so we're really happy to have these people here today. But our session will really focus on why CGIPD and how we might be able to assist you, or what your needs are. So we're really going to try to design the morning or the hour around your needs, what you're looking for, what questions you have, and what we might be able to help you with.
Thank you so much. All right, so let me now introduce our speaker, Dr. Megan Franke. She began her career as a school teacher in the Los Angeles area, earned her doctorate from the University of Wisconsin in educational psychology. Her first faculty position has been for many years in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. I say her first because it was always a chance of moving south for a second.
That's not the first time you said that.
It turns out that in 1863, President Lincoln, I wasn't here then, but President Lincoln started the National Academy of Sciences with the idea that we ought to really take what we know about science and use it to serve government's needs. Kind of a nice idea. And since that time, other national academies have grown out of that, and one of them is the National Academy of Education, which Megan is a distinguished member of. San Diego State, right now, has never had a National Academy member, so you never know. And Megan's the leader of UCLA Center X. I mentioned earlier the significant role that she played early on with the development of CGI. She has a deep commitment to issues of diversity and equity in school. She's also a deep commitment to the work with her graduate students, and I know that because graduate students speak very highly of her. And she has a long list as a scholar as well. And so without any further ado, let's welcome
just give me a little wave, and I do have a big teacher voice, and I'm happy to use it. I told people at dinner last night my feedback in my first teacher review was I talked too loud. I'm pretty sure there were a lot of things I needed to work on in my practice, not the least of was talking a little quieter. So, the other reason that I'm really happy to be here today is that I'm proud to be here on a day in which we are recognizing and honoring Tom Carpenter. So, Tom Carpenter changed my life. I came to graduate school as a teacher, had no idea what I was getting myself into, and he taught me to really deeply listen to young people, to respect their ideas, to respect teachers for the expertise that they have, and to work with them to figure out how to push back on what society thinks is right, that we need to kind of change for young people in this country. He was also deeply committed to issues of equity. One of my favorite qualities of Tom Carpenter is that we could argue a lot about a lot of ideas and come out of it feeling really good about each other, and both have learned. And so what I want to do thank you, Randy, today is to really highlight where I and my colleagues have gone with CGI, because I think that's the way to honor Tom. Like, his goal wasn't to keep this the same. His goal was to let go and let other people grow it. And part of what I want to share with you today is the way in which that work is growing. And particularly in relation to what Randy talked about with our deep concerns about issues of inequality and equity and social justice. And I want to be really clear that I don't have answers for you today about that, but I want you all to know what we're working on and how we're working on it and what that means. And so we're going to dig into some particulars today around that idea. But just as a little orientation, that CGI started because Tom Carpenter and Liz Fenema and Melvin Peterson thought children's thinking was really important for teachers to know about. And I think what we've learned about the power of children's thinking over the years is that that was actually right? That there's something really powerful for helping teachers understand children's thinking. But there are lots of people in this country who think about children's thinking. So one of the reasons I wanted to frame it around children's thinking is because CGI is not alone out there as a way to think about how do we help teachers, really improve their practice by focusing on children's thinking. Lots and lots of people are doing that. And so it's important to recognize the joint contribution we have. One of the things I think that CGI did that was so brilliant share ideas about children's thinking, teachers say, oh my gosh, my student did that. I tried what you said and my student did that, right? And when your students do what the book says they should do, you feel really good as a teacher and you get really excited, right? It gets really frustrating when you go to PD and they say, oh, you know, try this problem with your students, they should do this, and you go back and try it and your kids don't talk at all. And you're like, okay, what did I do wrong? Right? So one of the really important aspects of CGI is what's the right kind of knowledge and the right detail of knowledge that's going to help teachers and that makes sense for young people. And this is an equity issue, right? Because if you ask questions in certain ways, only certain students are going to be able to tell you what they know. And I want you to be thinking about that today as we talk a little bit more. But the other thing that this work has really taught us is we need to focus on what students do know, not on what they don't know. We spend a lot of time in math classes telling students what they're getting wrong and not focusing on what they do know. Today, I want to push on that even more and think about how do we reach what every single student knows and not just the students who think like we do. We have also learned that listening to students' thinking is generative. Once you start doing it as a teacher, you keep doing it, and the more you do it, the more you learn, and the more you learn about your young people. So there's something really important about the learning point of view about children's thinking. We also know that it matters in the moment work, right? It's not something that's just something you do outside, you plan about it. It matters in the moment as you're engaging with young people. It supports you getting to know students as people. So one of the things we forget sometimes in CGI is, yeah, we want you to get to know their thinking, their mathematical ideas, but in order to understand their mathematical ideas, you need to know who they are as human beings, what their experiences are outside of school, why they may or may not want to talk to you today, right? We also think about trying to really frame competency for young people in lots of different ways. So yes, young people who can share their mathematical ideas in detail, we can position them as competent, but young people who ask questions of somebody else's mathematical idea are also competent and thoughtful. And it's important mathematical work they're doing when they ask those questions. And that focusing on children's thinking enables teachers and students to learn together in ways that you develop this respect for each other's understandings. Right? So it creates a way in schools to begin to have a more respectful relationships that develop. So this is kind of how I think about what the power of children's thinking is for us as a community and why I think that tree has grown in the way it has, because we're starting in that place. That said, I think we have a lot to learn still about what it means to attend to children's thinking. I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to ask a group of teachers and administrators to reflect with me about what they think CGI is and why they do it. And the reason that I wanted to do that is because CGI is not mine, and it's not Tom Carpenter's, and it's not Liz Fenema's, it's not Dinah's, right? It is a community of people's, right? That we together are CGI. And so what I wanted to know is how is this community thinking about what CGI is and why they do it? And what struck me about it were the kinds of things that teachers were saying about, well, I do it because it values students, people, their histories and places. It focuses on the assets that students bring. Why do I do it? It challenges my assumptions about what students know and gives me the opportunity to get a better understanding of my math knowledge by growing as an educator. Some of those things are not things we were thinking about when CGI started, right? And what does it actually mean to value students' histories, their places? And we need to know more about that. And we need to know more about the ways in which we can push back on the structures that get us thinking in ways that are limiting what young people know and understand. And so this is the kind of work that we're trying to push on right now in the work that we're doing. So what I want to kind of address today, and I really want to stick to my 45 minutes, so I'm going to pay attention to the time, is I really want to go back to this idea of children's thinking and see if we can push on it a little bit to help us better recognizing the strengths that students have, and to think about more than identifying. So in CGI, we identify strategies that young people use, indirect modeling strategy, counting strategy, invented algorithms, right? I want to look beyond strategies into the partial understandings that students have and what that affords for us. Because if we can change and develop a more nuanced view of understanding, it think we have a much better chance of challenging the status quo in the teaching and learning of mathematics about whose math thinking matters and how it matters. And I think we can disrupt some of these historical patterns that exist where we see that, you know, in Los Angeles in particular, African-American students' knowledge is not being valued in ways that they're able to be successful, and it's not their fault, right? So we've got to be thinking about how we're privileging students, certain groups of students over others. Gender plays out here, right? Lots of things play out here. So that's what I want to work on today. So let's jump into it. So the way I want to jump into it is we have, over the last 8 or so years, been working with 4-year-olds. You all 3 and 4-year-olds. And working with 3 and 4-year-olds, if you're having a bad day, is the best thing ever. Because they love talking to you. They will talk to you about anything and everything. Things you, like your new haircut, right? And no, where'd you get that shirt, right? So we interviewed 450 4-year-olds twice. And we learned so much that got us thinking about these ideas of partial understandings. And so I want to use that work as a way to get us thinking some more about that. And then we're going to try taking those ideas into a little more sophisticated math and counting. And then we're going to talk about what that means for classroom practice. So, thinking about counting. Let's watch. So your job is to figure out what he knows about counting. Hear that? Okay, turn and tell your neighbor, what does he understand about counting? You get that? What does he know? So I'm thinking that some of these things are things that you talked about, right? That he knew the counting sequence, right? He could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Knew that sequence, right? He knew that there was an order to that sequence. He could use what we call one-to-one correspondence. So for every bear, it only gets one number word, right? So when I touch that bear, the first bear, that's a 1. When I touch the next bear, that's a 2. You can have one-to-one correspondence and go 1, 3, 7, 9, right? As long as it's one number word, one object, right? But he had the counting sequence and he had one-to-one correspondence, yes? Right? The one we talk about least probably is this idea of the cardinal principle or cardinality. And the cardinal principle is when I asked him how many bears do you have, he could tell me 8, right? Because he knows the last number you say is how many are in the group. That's actually a hard idea, okay? So, the question, the way in which in preschool and kindergarten we work on this is that we spend a lot of time working on the counting sequence, and once young people know the counting sequence, we start working on one-to-one correspondence, and once they know one-to-one correspondence, we work on cardinality. And we kind of think of them often as a sequence of things. So let's watch Miley. Again, your job is to figure out which
All right, check out my collection of pennies. Could you help me count them? How can I not? How many pennies are there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, 90, 60.
Thank you, Ray.
Right, what does she understand? What does she understand about that? All right, well, what does she know? What does she know?
One-to-one correspondence.
So she had one correspondence. She was almost perfect at it, right? There was one little blip in there as she was organizing her pennies, but she was almost perfect at it. And she organized them, right? Unlike Muhammad in the first one, she had an organizational plan, right? What else do you notice? So one-to-one correspondence, one penny, one number word with each one.
She knew that after a certain number, you're going to get more tens and increase by tens.
Okay, so she knew that they were going to increase by 10 somehow. Does she know the counting sequence? She knew the counting sequence. She did pretty good, right? So she got to 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So she knows something about these switching decades, yeah? But if we had said, does she know the counting sequence, yes or no, it would be no for this problem, right? Because she continues it incorrectly. But the way she continues it tells us something really important about her mathematical knowledge, right? First of all, it tells us something about the fact that she understands she can count by tens. I heard somebody over here, like, she can count by tens, right? Not only can she count by ones, but she can count by tens. There's something also kind of interesting about what she does when she's counting by tens. You all notice that?
Tenties?
Yeah, but she's trying to make up words, right? Because she doesn't know what to call these things. Because the way we name them doesn't make sense, right? So the way we say numbers doesn't make sense. So when young people make them up, right, they make words that make sense to them. Yeah.
What was the reason why you didn't ask how many pennies you got?
Yeah, that was a mistake. Angela did not ask her how you have? Because we don't know if she has the cardinal principle or not. We can't tell because we didn't ask her. So here's the other problem, is that usually when we ask young people to count, we just say that whatever the last number you say, we know that you know that that's how many, but it turns out it doesn't really work that way. Right? You actually have to ask to know cardinality. Good point. Right? But she also doesn't go all, like when she gets to 90, she doesn't go all the way back to 1 again. She goes back to, let's do 60, 70, 80 again. Let's do 60, 70, 80 again. Then she goes back to 40. But she knows something about the number sequence that tells her, you don't go back to 1 again. It has to get bigger. Like she has this idea that I have to keep going and it has to get bigger. It's a really important mathematical idea that she understands about the number system.
Just has confidence. She never
Doesn't she?
stopped and was like,
Yeah, or I'm going to stop just counting the pennies because I got to 90. Like, she could have just stopped counting the pennies. She knew you have to count every single one if you're going to count your collection. So something else that she really understands about counting. Okay. Any other things people noticed?
She had so much confidence that I almost got the sense that she was thinking, why don't you let me teach everybody else?
I know. Come on, girl, I got this, right? The thing that surprises us about these young people is how much they know and how much they know that's mathematically important. Not just, ooh, we can kind of pretend they're good at counting. She has really important mathematical ideas in there about understanding place value, right? About understanding how the number system works, about what it means to count a large collection of things. So I want to show you one more and let you do the same thing. This is Leonardo. Gotta watch now.
All right. What do you notice about these bears? You have red on them.
So no matter what number he landed on, when Nick said, how many do you have, he said that number back. Okay? This goes counter to what our earlier understandings were about young people's counting, that you shouldn't be able to use the cardinal principle until you have one-to-one correspondence. He doesn't show much evidence at the beginning of one-to-one correspondence, right? Where do we see a little bit of one-to-one correspondence? When Nick says, when you put 3 in my hand. We also think of having to create a set as harder than counting an existing set, right? Because you have to manage more things when you're creating a set. When you're counting a set, the idea is that it should be easier because you're managing less. Well, it turns out that with a small quantity anyway, that wasn't true for Leonardo, partly because there's something important about having to pick them up and move them into Nick's hand, right? So this is one of the ideas we're trying to kind of push on here is how you phrase the task for different young people is going to raise different mathematical understandings, right? How we ask it, what we ask, shows us different kinds of things young people know.
You know what else he does know is that that's a large group to him.
Yeah.
So immediately he said 100. And then he was asked to count, and he was like,
100.
sorry.
So he also knows he's got to attend to the group, right? Like his finger doesn't just go to the end and say, he's like, 100? And he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Like he has this notion that I've got to count them all, right? And that wherever I land, that's how many I tell. It's in the group, and it's big. Right? It's a big quantity. Anything else that you notice?
He has number sense.
He knows some of the neat number sequence, you all, right? He can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So to take somebody like Leonardo and give him this task, our earlier kind of work people have done counting would just pretty much say you can't count 15 pairs. Rather than recognizing the really important mathematical understandings he does have about counting this large group, counting the whole thing, knowing some of the number sequence, being able to use the cardinal principle pretty consistently, and being able to use one-to-one correspondence up to 3 when he's asked to create a set. Okay? We learn all of those things when we watch him, and when we listen to what he has to say, and when we give him multiple opportunities to show us what he knows. So, I want to show you some data that we collected to help us think a little bit more beyond these particular young people and to get us thinking more about this partial understanding idea. So we asked, the really common tasks that we ask young people, we ask them to count as high as you can count. Just count for me, because we want to know their counting sequence. It's probably the first task that we ask young people. Count as high as you can. If they stopped at like 10, we might say, oh, okay, can you keep going? So we prompt them twice. That's the way this task works. You prompt them twice to see how far they can keep going. So we did that task. The other very common task for young people, and this is the task that they use when we make national claims about whether kids can, what they know going to kindergarten. The task they most often ask is this: line up 8 pairs. They line them up for you. So not like Mohammed said, line them up in a line for you, and they ask you how many pairs are there. Probably the most common task that we do. And then we added this, as you saw with Miley, we added a task where we asked young people to count 31 pennies. Nobody thought this was a good idea. Like, why would you ask 3 and 4-year-olds? First of all, pennies probably not a good idea, but they really work for us for lots of reasons. But nobody thought counting 31 pennies was a very good idea for 3 and 4-year-olds. But here's some of what we learned when we have a lot of tasks, but these are the 3 I want to talk about today. So if you look across these 2 tasks, the counting orally and the pennies task, what you see is if you look at what percentage of the kids counted farther when we said count out loud, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? 35.5% of the kids counted farther when we said count orally. 40% of the kids counted farther on the pennies. This is a little counterintuitive because you would think in counting pennies you have to manage multiple things, right? When you're counting the pennies, you have to manage one-to-one correspondence, you have to manage organizing the pennies, you have to do the counting sequence, but you have to do it in relation to all of those things. So why would kids count better on the penny task than they do when we just say count as high as you can count? Why would that be? Well, tell your neighbor. Why would it be that kids count better? 40% of them, not a couple. 40% of them counted better on the penny task.
We were talking about how possibly when you have actual objects, there's a purpose to your counting.
Did other people talk about that? There's a purpose. I've got these pennies in front of me. I gotta keep going. I got more pennies. Like you kind of see with Miley, she wants to finish that pile, right? So she's gonna keep going beyond what she might if she were just counting out loud. Yeah.
And I like the familiarity with the pennies too. Like you might know, oh, that's 1 cent, 2 cents. Oh, I have 75, that's a gumball.
Yeah.
Versus if you're just counting in your head, you don't know what that 60 represents in a 60.
Really nice point, right? Context matters.
I think the difference in those two might be the way that the kids learn. So if they learned it as a rote thing, they just repeated it. It's like repeating a song. But if they actually they learned by actually having one-to-one with people helping them count.
Another good explanation, right? I think the thing that that for us was so striking about this data is we did not expect it to be exactly the same. We didn't expect that the numbers that they counted the highest to would be exactly the same for both tasks, but we also didn't expect so many young people would count higher with the pennies. And it particularly becomes important because the way we assess kids most often is just to say, how high can you count? So that means we're way underestimating young people's knowledge, right? And it means that we have to think about what the tasks we're using that are getting at what young people know and understand. The thing that this doesn't capture is all the things we learn about Miley because she counted that large collection of pennies on top of learning about her counting secrets, right? I should note that in all of these tasks that I'm talking about today, the interviewers were all bilingual English and Spanish because the population that we were working with were predominantly native Spanish-speaking young people. And it turns out that our data is pretty much strongly suggests that you have to be able to code, you have to be able to go back and forth between languages because young people who are native Spanish speakers who then go to school and learn in English, if you assess them in Spanish only, there's stuff they've learned in English they can't tell you now. And if you only assess them in English, there's stuff they know in Spanish that they can't tell you now. And so it turns out that being able to have people who can go back and forth, if you ask the students, they're not actually sure either, right? So they might say, oh, I want to do it in English because that's what they do in school. Whereas as they get going, they realize, I don't know what that means that you just said, and now I need to hear it in Spanish, right? So it's a very complicated thing that we're asking young people to do, and we have to really think about that when we assess young people. So some of our results about how young people did is related to the ways in which we assess these young people. We also try to spend time in classrooms so the students knew us before we talked to them, so they didn't feel uncomfortable sitting down with us and having conversations about these tasks. So I want to show you some other data that was striking to us in what we learned. 73% of the students that we talked to could use one-to-one correspondence in at least one part of the pennies task. And that 16% of them had perfect one-to-one correspondence over all 31 pennies. Only 2% of the kids got this right, counting the 31 pennies, right? So not surprising, it's a really hard task for 4-year-olds. So the fact that 2% of them got it right, okay, that's pretty good for a 4-year-old, right? But that really masked the fact that 73% of them had some one-on-one correspondence, right? And 16% of them had one-on-one correspondence through the whole thing. It's also true that 41% of the kids who didn't use one-on-one correspondence on the bearer's task did on the pennies task, right? So if you think of the bearer's task as the point of, this is what we use to decide what young people know about counting, it's underestimating their one-to-one correspondence. What we find is this lining up the bears, doesn't work so well for kids, right? We think it's making it easier to line it up for them, but moving it matters. And when you line it up for them, they think they're not supposed to move it, right? And so you see kids go like this. Because they're trying not to touch it, so they don't think they're supposed to mess with that beautiful line you just made, right? And so that's a large percentage of students, right, who in the pennies task showed one-to-one correspondence that didn't show it in the bear's task. Yeah.
Could it be true that when you see a bear, there's all kinds of other associations that happen in your brain? Stories about bears, and what
Could
bears
be.
sound like, and what color are they? With bennies, they're all the same color, you can slide them, and there's not a whole lot of
Good point.
extra stuff going on in their head while they're trying to do this math.
Really nice explanation, right? Bears conjure up lots of other things. And they're probably saying to myself, can't touch them, want to play with them, can't touch them, right? We're just taking over a lot of cognitive processes. But it is also true that in preschools that we work in kindergarten, teachers want to organize for young people. We do this in elementary school too, you all. We do it even more when they get older. We want to do the organizing, right? That we want to organize what it looks like on their page when they write it down. We want to organize how they handle their counters. We want to do the organizing. Turns out, it really works better when young people get to do their own organizing, which is very frustrating for a teacher because it takes them a long time, and it doesn't seem very efficient. Right? And so we want to fix it. And I think this really challenges our notions of what it means to fix it. It's also true that 15% of the kids who did not use the cardinal principle on the bearer's task did use it on the pennies task. So one of the things that this starts challenging for us, our data challenges this linear progression. Right? That kids don't go from learning patterns to dance, right? To knowing one-to-one to being able to use the cardinal principles. Some kids actually develop the cardinal principle and are really, really good at it, like Leo, right? And other students get really, really good at one-to-one correspondence, and other kids get really good at the counting sequence, which means that we need to create opportunities for students to work on all of those in relation to each other and show us what they know about that, rather than treating this as a linear sequence. And partly it's probably because of the way they've learned things, like you mentioned, right? That depending on what you've been doing, you get better at some of these things over others of these things. So, talk about all of these things. The last thing that I want to say about that as we move into the looking at some other piece of data examples here is that tasks matter. And we hesitate to give challenging tasks to people because we're afraid they won't be able to do them. And that's a good thing to worry about, but if we can give a challenging task and really attend to the ways in which young people are thinking about that challenging task and what they're doing that's productive in it, instead of saying right, wrong, then there's more opportunity to see things kids know. So if we want to attend to the nuance of young people's mathematical understanding, we have to think about which tasks are allowing that to happen and which tasks are only going to tell us they know it, they don't know it, or they can use this strategy or this strategy, but that's all that I know. And that's what I want to work on a little bit. So let's take that idea of, so these understandings I'm talking about, right, Leo's being able to do this all the way through the set, or counting 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, these nuanced understandings that they have that aren't complete, right, make us think about how do we find that in other ways in the work that kids are doing, right? So often in the work we do in CGIs, we work really hard on identifying the strategies young people use naturally to solve problems and how those strategies develop. I want to challenge us to look beyond the strategy. and say, what's in the work that shows us what young people know? So turn and talk to your neighbor. This is the problem that was posed that day. This is in a 3rd grade class. Kaylee went on a trip to the beach at the end of, so those are 3 number sets that they can choose from. At the end of 2 days, she had collected 70 seashells. If she collected the same number of seashells each day, it's really hard when you're reading, how many seashells did she collect each day? Right? So, we could easily look at this piece of student work and say, this student's completely wrong. Right? Because this student added 2 70s together, yes? So, what does the student understand, though? Can you talk about that? What does the student understand? Mathematically, what does the student to help us see what is it they're understanding that we can highlight and leverage. Because if you understand those things you all just laid out, if you see those things, your support for her is going to be really different than having her start all over and say, hey, let's fix this. I really want to help you, let's fix this. Instead, we can say, wow, she really understands groups. How can we use that, right, to help her say, you've got the group part. Let's keep going. Make sense? So I have a whole bunch of these examples, but I'm going to skip them all. Because I want to go to one that's, oh, this one's really kind of fun. So we're going to do this problem for the next one. 4 children are sharing 3 large cookies. They're sharing so each gets the same amount. How much will one child get? That says extra. That's a really important mathematical idea, right? Okay, but let's look at the same problem this way. Talk about this one. So the student says each kid will have 3 over 3. So what do they understand? Talk to your neighbor. What do you think they know? What might they be understanding? We're not going to talk about it. You're going to have to talk to people later about all the cool things that the student knows and understands and where that 3 over 3 might come from. But the work we're trying to do is to say, how do we as teachers now try and find those spaces where students are confident? And that the point I want to make about this is we're not trying to make up things that they're confident about. That there's real deep mathematical understandings here that are really important for the work that these students are going to do later that can get pulled out of here in ways that help us recognize and help the student recognize that they are confident and that they may not be things that we valued before in school, but they're really valuable and we can help them see how valuable those things are. So, so I think this is essentially what I just said. We've had this really difficult time with this idea of partial understanding. What do I mean about partial understanding? Does it make it sound like it's less than an understanding? And I'm going to talk about that in a second, so I don't have the right words for it. But we do want to create spaces where they see themselves as confident, where there's lots of openings for students to build on their current understanding, to create a broader view of what counts as knowing and value those things, and to disrupt this binary. You either can count or you can't count. You can solve the problem or you can't solve it. You can use this strategy or you can't use this strategy, right? Rather to kind of disrupt that idea. I want to contrast that for a minute with this idea of mastery. We talked about this at dinner last night, so we'll see how this works here. So when you think about mastery, what do you think about, Joel? Think about mastery for a minute. Mastery. Master. We talk about it in school a lot.
I got it.
Mastery is a big issue in schools, right? You can think about, I want to talk about I heard Steph Curry one time interviewed. Steph Curry is a basketball player, professional basketball player, plays for the Golden State Warriors, probably is seen as having the best shot, right? The best shot in basketball. And somebody interviewed him once, and I happened to see it, and they asked him, so do you really need to practice anymore? Like, you have the best shot in basketball. And he said, actually, the more that I work on it, the more it allows me to innovate, right? Like, he wasn't talking about precision. He was talking about innovation. He said, I can change my shot when I learn more about it, and I can make adjustments to it in ways that change how we think about making that shot. Okay? For me, that really pushes back on this idea of mastery, because if anybody's mastered a shot, it's him, right? And even he thinks he has mastered it, because the more I work on it, the more I can innovate. So now he's a professional, he's an outlier. I got pushed back about this a little at dinner last night, which I agree with. But, so my mom has been making pies for her entire probably most of her 85 years. She grew up with a mom who baked. She's been baking, she was little. A couple years ago, we had Thanksgiving together, my whole family was there, and we had a pie making contest. This is what my family does. And my mom, we all agreed, made the best pie she had made in her entire 85 years. Like, that shouldn't be possible, right? Like, she mastered pie making a long, long time ago and was making pretty good pies, right? But the more you do it, the more new ingredients come to be, right? Ingredients change. The more you're able to do things you weren't able to do before in ways that are innovative and awesome. You would think that somebody as they get older, like my mom, would actually be getting a little worse at her pie making because she's forgetting things and you kind of lose some of that. But there's something really important about that for me. But we talk in school a lot about you got to master your multiplication facts, right? Before you go do this other math, you've got to master place value. And I guess I want to challenge us a little to say that thinking about partial understandings and mastery do not go together, right? That this is what mastery learning says, that Slavin talks about mastery learning as a category of instructional methods which establish a level of performance that all students must master before moving on to the next unit. If you look it up in the dictionary, it talks about mastery learning breaking subject matter and learning content into units with clearly specified objectives which are pursued until they are achieved. Learners work through each block of content in a series of sequential steps. That does not fit our counting data, you all, at all, right? It doesn't fit most of the work that we are trying to do with young people in schools, although that's what we're trying to do. I'm not going to spend any time with this, but these are 5 different kids who solve the same problem, and the question I would pose for you is which of these kids have mastered place value? They all got it right, they're all using place value, but do you ever master place value? Ever? Like, don't we continue to learn about place value and get better at it? We go to new content, place value comes up, we learn more about it. So I think that the partial understanding stuff really forces us to push back on these mastery ideas, because mastery gets us thinking about certain kinds of skills and knowledge, right? It leads us to think some students have figured it out, they can move on, other students haven't. It categorizes kids into these dichotomous groups. It ignores their partial understanding. It makes us, right, students, the parents, look for particular kinds of accomplishment to say, yes, you've mastered that. It ignores a lot of the kinds of learning we're looking for, and it really worries me because I think it contributes to inequality in schools for kids. Because we're only valuing certain kinds of knowledge and certain kinds of participation in ways that really ignore the expertise, the really deep knowledge that some people have that get ignored because they haven't done it the way school wants them to master it in the sequence school wants them to. So I want us to leave today really thinking about these ideas of mastery and remembering that these ideas of this you don't need to know this, partial understanding become really important. And that we need to think a little bit more in our practice about how these ideas emerge naturally. What kinds of tasks can we create that allow students to really honestly show us what we know? Not kind of in the school way, but really allow us to see what they know. We need to think about how to take up the very resources and understandings that students bring, right? Like this data shows us that kids get worse at these kind of problems as they get older, right? And they're getting worse at these problems as they get older because they're not using what they know well. They're not using their own understandings as they do the tasks. They're using what school's telling them to do. So they're getting it wrong as they get older, right? It's also true that we have these ideas that young people, and this is true in middle school and high school too, can't do certain things. So we shouldn't give them the chance, right? An example of that is preschool teachers really think kids shouldn't write things down. They shouldn't represent because it's too formal. Okay? It turns out young people are really, really good at representing their mathematical ideas if we give them the opportunity to, right? So we kind of have to challenge our assumptions about what should we give students a chance to do and not do. Just give that. And if we want to create these spaces, we have to find ways for kids to benefit from each other's ideas, right? From kids to be able to hear the nuanced ideas that other students have so they see that they're okay. And I can do that because guess what? Mariella also does that and it works for her. And we have to think beyond the problem context, right? Our solution in equity is often to change the problem context. It's not just the context we need to change. It's the way we pose the task. It's what we accept as manageable. I did pose this problem in my 3rd grade class last year, and the kids didn't know what a Tootsie Roll was. Seriously, I didn't. They're like a roll of coins? Really? You don't know what a Tootsie Roll is? Okay. So context does matter, right? But we got to get beyond that because I think our equity solution tends to be all about context and not about the other resources that we bring or the kinds of tasks that we have. And that's the end of my task. You all, my talk today, I want us to really think about challenging mastery and thinking about personal growth. Thanks for hanging with me.
About estimation, when children are counting, do they have an approximate idea how many pennies might be? Like there might be 15, so they don't wind up saying something like 30 or 40. If they said that, they would say, well, you know, I can tell this maybe. So what role does estimation constrain?
Great question. Really, really great question.
Answers?
So I would say that our data would suggest that it takes a lot of knowledge and skill to estimate. And that when young people it takes a lot of experience with counting to develop that knowledge and skill. We don't see kids estimating early on. So if we said to them, how many are there? You hear what Leonardo said, 100, right? And they pick numbers they're familiar with. Now they do have some sense of magnitude, right? Like it's big or it's little, right? But they're not very good at it's less than 20. Right? Because that requires knowing a lot about how the number system works and being able to use that. But I do think they understand a lot about big and small and bigger or smaller. So like if you said, do you think these set of bears we're counting right now are bigger or smaller than the last set? They can tell you whether it's bigger or smaller than the last set. They just can't tell you necessarily that it's more than 20. And even if they just counted the last set and saw that it was 15, they won't say, oh, it's less than 15. Make sense? Yeah.
You spoke earlier about how the way we structure discourse, the way we ask questions, those kind of things can provide access to some kids but not necessarily others.
Yeah.
How would folks like us who are well versed in the research of CGI but not so well versed in what you're getting at there learn more? How could we structure our classrooms so that we can give more access to more children in the way we have conversations?
So I think that that's a great question. I wish had a better answer. But what I will say about that is, the reason that we're working on getting teachers to attend to partial understandings is because once you change your stance about that, it changes the questions you ask. So rather than trying to force yourself to ask different questions, if you kind of get yourself looking at, oh, what does she know within this mess that I can't figure out on the paper? Or what does she know within this beautiful strategy? That it changes the questions that I ask. And it changes the way I ask young people to engage with each other, right? So usually when we have kids engage with each other, we say, hey, did you get the same answer or did you get a different answer? Talk to each other about that, right? Instead I can say, right, find something on your paper that looks the same and talk about that, right? Or, right, so that we gotta find different ways into letting young people express what it is they do know, even if it's not complete. The other thing is that we need to find ways to share incomplete things in class. Because it turns out the way we as teachers engage with young people is exactly the way they engage with each other. So we get a chance, because we are researchers, we videotape pairs of kids, like we videotape all the kids, we get to hear them talk to each other. We get to hear all of their talk, all during that. Everything. Like the fight on the playground, right? We know all the stuff you don't get to hear, or you only get to hear a little bit of, we get to hear all of it. Okay? Well, it turns out that the phrases you use as a teacher, they use. They hear you, they pick it up, and they use it with their colleagues. So, what you do matters. So what I would say about that is that if you, so a lot of our teachers have started doing things like, Joshua, can you just share the first thing you did? Don't share the whole thing, just share the first thing. And now let's talk about what are all the ways we could finish Joshua's idea, right? So that it's not about, did you do the perfect full thing, but what did you do first? And that's a valuable thing. Like the first thing you did is valuable. So we can build from there. What are the ways we might build from there? And then we can go back to Joshua and say, is that what you did? Oh, no, I didn't do that, right? I did this. But then the students who are participating got a chance to really deeply engage with that idea before they listen to what Joshua said, so it makes sense to them. So we have to find some different moves we can make that really allow young people to share part of an idea. This is really important as kids get older, because they get worried that they're going to say the wrong thing in front of all of their peers. So saying a little piece, and you have to force them. Like I keep saying, only one thing. I only want to hear one thing, right? We work on it, like before they share out. What's the one thing that you're going to share, right? Because they want to tell their whole thing, right? And so getting them to tell an idea, right, or one part of an idea, is really helpful. When we do things like ask students about somebody's strategy, right? Let's pinpoint something in there, like, I saw Megan did something about her groups. What do you notice about what she did with her groups? So if you can do that as a teacher, your students will do that too.
Yeah. In the beginning, you had on the slide it says CGI values children's histories and culture, and then towards the end of your talk, you said we need to go beyond the context of the problem. Okay. You're saying, it's not enough to talk about throwing quinceañera at a party. Like,
Yes.
that's not the thing.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that
Yeah,
a bit more?
great question. Didn't really get there in the talk, so thanks for asking that. So one of the things that we know is that young people's experiences, cultural experiences out of school are really, really different. But school values a particular kind of cultural participation, right? That you're supposed to raise your hand, get called on, one person talks at a time. Right? Think about Freddie Erickson did this awesome study where he studied dinner time conversations in people's homes, right? Turns out, imagine your own, right? We have very different kinds of dinner time conversations in different families, and there are long histories to those dinner time conversations. And that if you're a student who grew up in a family where at the dinner table, what you do is you all talk at the same time. That's how your family works, right? In some families, kids don't talk at the dinner table, right? In other families, you take turns. There are lots of ways. So you grew up with lots of experiences about how to participate, and then you get to school, and you're supposed to only participate this way, right? How do we change those structures so everybody finds a space that they can participate in math class? Now, some teachers will say back to me, but don't they have to do the school way? Well, one answer to that is why? Why should the school way only be the good way for some kids? Right? My other point back to them is even if you believe that, you're not going to learn it by throwing them into the deep end of the pool and saying, figure it out. Because by the time they figure it out, they're going to feel really bad about themselves and don't think that they know how to do it. So even if you believe that they should figure out how to do school, we have to help them get there in a way more productive way than we're helping them get there now. It's also the case that if you think about the ways in which kids put stuff on their paper, there are cultural entailments to how we represent our ideas, what tools we use. And if we only value certain ways of doing that, what you're going to get is kids thinking, I shouldn't think that way, I have to do it the school way, right? So keep asking yourself, am I asking them to do it the school way, or am I letting them do it the way that makes sense to them? And it's an uncomfortable thing, right? It's a very uncomfortable thing as teachers to have to challenge the assumptions we have about how the school is asking us to do stuff. And how do we push back on the ways school is asking us to do things for young kids? What do we post? We do a lot of wacky things in schools about what gets posted and what gets valued and how that gets valued. And all of those, for me, have particular kinds of cultural entailments that we need to figure out how to push back on that are mathematical, but at the same time don't feel like math because they're school structures, right? Of ways in which we do things. And so partly it's being aware of when kids do things, it's like, well, why did I want them to do it that way? And do they really have to do it that way? Or is it just because I think that's the right thing, or the school tells me, or society says, yeah, you have to be able to do it this way. Our data, our most recent data that I shared in CTM shows that kids participate really differently in different spaces. So we have kids who all do really, really well in math, who don't participate in the whole class ever. And they do really, really well. And one teacher's response is, well, how do I fix that? I need to get that kid to participate in the whole class. Well, why? Right? Like if they're really doing beautifully mathematically, they're engaged in turn and talks, they explain their ideas when they're with a partner, do they have to? And if they do have to, why? Right? And how do we help them with that? Right? So I think there are all of these things that we do that we have this idea that everybody has to do them the same way at the same time, and it's a very narrow way. Does that make sense?
I'm going to actually extend this question and answer for 5 more minutes. I think it's really kind of nice for us to have a chance to hear Megan reflect on some of your thoughts. So I just want you to be aware that I'm aware of the time. So we'll go until 10:05. I'll stop us promptly then. That'll give us 15 minutes for a break, and then to get to the next group.
We're going to go there and then back.
Okay, so you also mentioned about the biliteracy of some of your
Yes.
students and how important that is.
Yep.
Is there a dovetail on what you were just talking about into that biliteracy piece? And can you talk about that?
Really awesome. So for me, language is a resource, right? The fact that these young people come with multiple languages, even if we can, one way to look at them is they're not complete. Another way to look at them is, wow, they're developing multiple languages. They have some really powerful resources. There is lots of evidence now to show that multilingual resources are really productive for you as a student. It may not present that way initially, right? So we have this notion that kids come to school with no language. You've all heard that? Like, they don't have English, they don't have Spanish, they don't have, right? Or they speak Hmong, but they don't really, right? And so I think we have to change the way that we think about these resources and look at them as a resource. That's a multilingual resource, right? And to recognize that students are going to mix things up in ways that we think on the surface are problematic, but are actually powerfully important, right? The ways in which they use English and Spanish together, the ways in which they turn a Spanish word into an English word, or an English word into a Spanish word, it's actually really productive, right? So we just have to change our notions about that, and we have to look for opportunities for them to use their language in ways that make sense. So, a really concrete example, people aren't going to like this. I don't like sentence stems at all. I don't like them, right? And I don't like them because they force you to say it exactly the same way. And we think they're helpful because we are giving them a place to start. But just so you know, the place to start is not the hard part. The hard part is finishing the dang sentence, right? So, because think about most of the sentence stems are things like, I started with. So, I get why people use them, but if you're going to use them kids make up. Let the kids make up what they want the sentence stems to be, because they're going to make up sentence stems that aren't the way we say it, right? But the way that makes sense to them to say it. And so when we think about the ways in which we're creating multilingual resources, I think we have to challenge ourselves about those and decide, are those actually making use of their multilingual resources, or are those forcing them to talk in the way that I want them academically to talk? So I think it is very much the same as the kinds of things that I was talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
In your experience with going to these classrooms and admin and all of this, the reality is, my question would be, do you have a suggestion or a comment on letting controlled anarchy be in the classroom? Because sometimes that's what it looks like. When we're getting ready for local measures in my school district, and the first thing they said is there's no partial credit this year. And that just took away a little piece of something that we can look at. And I was wondering, in your experience, have you?
Yeah. So right now I'm working in 120 elementary schools and preschools in LA. So we're dealing a lot with that particular issue. And I would say that the teachers in this system that have been the most successful are the ones that figure out how to create a wall in which they can help kids do things that make sense, right? But and then let that go for as long as they can, and then be able to say to kids, but here's the system we're in, and here's how we're going to have to do this here, right? It's not a comfortable place to be. Those teachers are also the ones that are pushing back on the system. So I will say, there's a big voice in LA Unified right now pushing back on their textbook because it's not working for them, right? And that big voice matters. Right? So we can't not do it because we think that because of the structures that exist, otherwise we're going to keep reproducing the status quo. So we got to find some way to create a space in our school, in our classroom with a colleague, that we can create spaces. The other thing I will say about that is that my experience is, if your kids do well mathematically, nobody complains. When they complain is when your test scores aren't high. So if you can keep doing some things that really are showing your kids understand, and they do okay on the measures, you're not going to get as much pushback as you are going to get if your kids don't do very well. Okay. Here.
I think I need to create space.
You guys can ask me your questions later.
So, before we finish Megan, I just want to remind you that at 10:20 we'll be in here with Megan. We'll be right across the open area with Melissa and Rachel, and that is focused more toward classroom teachers, and then right around in 104, I believe, it'll sort of be a focus more with professional development or administration with Dinah and Kristen. And I'd like to thank all of us